Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Ecological Threats to Peace webinar. Thank you to everyone joining with us from around the globe. I'm Javon Dominique Kafua, and I'm coming to you live from Boston, where I'm the Assistant Director of Educational Initiatives at the Office of Alumni Relations at Northeastern University. I am thrilled to have with us this evening alumna Francesca Batault and Charles Allen from the Institute of Economics and Peace. To get us started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Please keep your microphones on mute to ensure the best sound quality. If you have any questions during this webinar, we encourage you to type them in the chat box. You can also access the chat by clicking the chat button in the bottom toolbar. We'll be having a Q&A session about halfway through and for the last 15 minutes of this webinar to get your questions answered. For optimal viewing, we recommend selecting the speaker view in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom meeting. We wanted to let you know that this webinar is also being recorded and will be uploaded to the Northeastern Alumni YouTube channel by the end of the week. Participation in this webinar means you consent to being recorded. Now, I'll turn it over to Francesca.
Thank you, Javon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I have no doubts will be a very exciting webinar. As Javon said, my name is Francesca. I'm a Northeastern alum, having graduated from its College of Social Science and Humanities in 2019. I have the privilege of being your co-host and moderator this evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank a few people for making this event possible. Firstly, to our VP of Alumni, Rick Davis, and Javon, without whom this event would just never have materialized. And then obviously the Institute for Economics and Peace and our speaker, Charles Allen, for the incredible work they do and for being so generous to share it with us this evening. Before I hand over to our esteemed speaker, please allow me to introduce him and tell you a little bit about the work of the Institute for Economics and Peace. Charles Allen is the Director of Partnerships with the Institute of Economics and Peace. These partnerships are strategic and grassroots partners, inclusive of governments, non-governmental organizations, educations, organizations, service groups, and other institutes. His recent works have been with partners in Zimbabwe, Thailand, Cambodia, and India, to name a few. Through partnerships, he's activating IEP's Positive Peace Framework globally. Charlie, thank you for being with us this evening. Now to get to the presentation. The Institute for Economics and Peace, I'm actually just going to wait for Charlie to put up the slides. There we go, so you can catch up. Great. The Institute for Economics and Peace is an independent, not-for-profit think tank dedicated to building a greater understanding of the key drivers of peace, as well as identifying the economic benefits that increased peacefulness can deliver. It aims to create a paradigm shift in the way the world thinks about peace by using data-driven research to show that peace is a positive, tangible, and achievable measure of human well-being and dignity. The IEP is a global organization. It has its headquarters in Sydney, but it also has offices in New York, Brussels, The Hague, Mexico City, and Harare. The IEP is in the business of creating research that is both readable, useful, and accessible to practitioners and policymakers. As you can see here, it has had significant reach in its research. In 2019, it had a media reach of 16 billion across 150 countries. It has published 10 reports, all of which are available online for you to read, and its work has been picked up on by numerous multilateral organizations, including the OECD, the World Bank, and the UN. As the IEP is in the business of measuring peace, it also relies on two key definitions of peace. The first being a negative conception of peace, which is defined as the absence of violence or fear of violence. And then on the other hand, we have positive peace, which refers to the attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful society. It is this definition that they use for the Ecological Threat Register, which is the focus of tonight's event. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Charlie. Thank you for being with us, and I'm very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for introducing the Institute for Economics and Peace. Also, thank you to Northeastern University Alumni Association for hosting this event, and thank you to Javan Dominique for her organisation for this event. And thank you all for joining. This is the second event we've done with the Alumni Association, and with both events we've had a great reach and attracted a very diverse and global audience. I would like to start just talking about positive peace. As Francesca mentioned, certainly the positive peace is the measure that we use to judge a country's resilience in building the Ecological Threat Register. So I think that's a good place to start. So our positive peace index is in its 8th year. It ranks 163 countries globally. That 163 countries picks up on 97% of the, 99.7% of the global population. It uses 24 indicators, and really that's the strength of the Institute for Economics and Peace. It's identifying data sets, aggregating those data sets, and then unpicking the story that sits behind that aggregated data. Francesca mentioned our reach, and we're very much about making our research as accessible as possible, and really we position it as practitioner-focused research. We want to make it accessible, usable, practical, and applicable. Our research and the Positive Peace Index is developed by the Institute for Economics and Peace, but it's guided by an international panel of experts. The Positive Peace Index is, or the Positive Peace Framework is empirically derived using some 25,000 different data sets, indices and surveys that are aggregated together. So when you look at how the globe looks from a positive peace perspective, and the significance of this map will become evident when we start to talk about ecological threats. This is what the globe looks like when it's shaded with countries' positive peace score. The lighter blue countries being the countries that are low in positive peace, and the darker blue countries being countries that are high in positive peace. So I just draw your attention to some of the areas that are light blue. Africa clearly jumps out, as does the Central Asia and MENA region. So when you look at positive peace globally and over trends over the last 10 years, positive peace has actually improved some 2.6% over the past decade. So this is really interesting, because when you look at negative peace as measured by our global peace index, that has decreased over the past decade. I just want to mention here that both the data sets that I've mentioned there, the positive peace index and the global peace index, do not at this point include the impact of COVID-19, and certainly the impact of COVID-19 will become evident in this year's Global Peace Index and Positive Peace Report. You can see that 128 countries have improved in peacefulness, looking at peace from a positive perspective, and 35 have deteriorated. Down the bottom there are the specific pillars of positive peace that have improved and those that have deteriorated, but I won't dive into that detail tonight. I should mention that all of our reports are available on our website. The Vision of Humanity, freely available, downloadable and PDF, as well as interactive maps are available if you want to dive deeper on particular pieces of information. So I mentioned the positive peace pillars, and this is what we've derived from that empirical research around positive peace. And these 8 pillars work together as a system. This really is systems thinking. And we certainly know that a higher positive peace country, I'll talk about the benefits of higher positive peace countries, but we know when these pillars are working together as a system, it provides the optimal environment for the human potential to flourish. I always think when you look at these pillars, you think, well, there's no real surprises there. You sort of know this intuitively, but what our research does is demonstrates it empirically. So what do we know about positive peace? By looking at other social, economic, environmental indicators, we know that higher positive peace leads to stronger resilience, and I'll touch a little bit on that because it's very relevant to the Ecological Threat Register. We know higher positive peace countries have better environmental outcomes, have better measures of well-being, perform better against development goals. We saw that certainly higher positive peace countries perform better against the Millennial Development Goals and are performing better against the Sustainable Development Goals. And have better, as I said, better economic outcomes, in particular higher per capita income. So I just want to touch on resilience and positive peace. And I guess looking at resilience, we define that as a country or a community's ability to be prepared, to be able to respond, and to be able to recover from a shock. And never is this more relevant than this period of time where we're facing a global shock, still in the response phase to a global shock, with recovery starting to merge into recovery phase for the current global shock of COVID-19. I've mentioned the benefits of higher positive peace, and that positive peace being a good proxy indicator for a country's resilience, which is why I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about resilience. I'll just look at a couple of quick data sets that I think are really interesting when you look at this aspect of resilience compared to positive peace levels. And you see in this graph, I draw your attention to the graph on the bar chart on the right first of all. So looking at the number and frequency of natural disasters in countries, but the countries are blocked in regards to their levels of positive peace. And you can see that very high positive peace countries, medium and low positive peace countries sought to have around about the same frequency of natural disasters. It is a little bit higher in medium and low positive peace countries, but generally their frequencies of disasters is about the same. What is stark is when you look at the graph, the bar chart on the left, which is the number of fatalities for that same amount of disasters. And you can see, and as you'll probably expect, that high positive peace countries, more resilient countries, have a far lower body count for around about the same number of disasters. And the difference is stark, as I said. So that's looking at natural disasters. So exogenous shocks. If you look at endogenous shocks, or I like to say man-made shocks, if you like, or person invoked shocks. And this is just a short grab of some of those endogenous shocks, being the onset of genocide, violent conflict onset, and political shock onset. Once again, with the frequency of those shocks packaged into very high, medium, and low positive peace countries. And once again, you see, looking at endogenous shocks, that the frequency is far higher in low positive peace countries. Okay, I'm just throwing up, these are very busy graphs, so I do apologise for that. And these are a couple of graphs out of the Ecological Threat Register, which really highlight this point. The countries most at threat are the ones with low or deteriorating positive peace, and you can see those positive peace status in 2018 for the countries mentioned. The countries in this table are the ones that are likely to have the worst shocks, with poor resilience, with 6 facing water shocks, 13 with high population growth, and 3 with food security issues. It's similar, so, and this chart is focusing on resource scarcity as the header indicates there. The second chart is looking at the natural disasters. And you can see that more than 1 billion people live in countries with high exposure to natural disasters and low resilience. And droughts are the most common featured natural disasters, followed by floods. And I should say that 11 countries are in both the tables that I've just demonstrated. So it's the resource scarcity table as well as the natural disaster hotspots table. Okay, so I'll move on from the positive peace report and that link between positive peace and resilience and move into the ecological threat register. So the ecological threat register, it's in its first edition. So the positive peace report that I mentioned before, it's in its 8th edition. IEPs, or Institute for Economics and Peace, Global Peace Index, which is certainly our most known piece of research, is in its 15th year this year. But the Ecological Threat Register is in its first edition. It ranks 157 countries, which is a bit lower than the Positive Peace Report and the Global Peace Index. And that's due to data gaps in some countries, but still covering off on 97% of the world's population. It looks at 8 threats, these threats being water stress, food insecurity, droughts, floods, cyclone, rising temperature, sea level rise, and population growth. It examines a country's ability to be prepared to respond and recover to these threats using the positive peace as an indicator of resilience, as I've already mentioned. And the ETR, or the Ecological Threat Register, gives each country a threat count, which represents the overall threats a country faces out of a maximum possible of 8 threats. So the Ecological Threat Register is looking at threats now, but also provides projections on threats at country levels projected out to 2050. Once again, this work is guided by an international panel of experts. So I'll go to some key findings within the Ecological Threat Register. And what we're seeing is that 141 countries out of those countries that we looked at, remember it's 157 countries, are exposed to at least one ecological threat between now and 2050. 19 of the countries with the highest exposure to ecological threats are home to 2.1 billion people. 10 of the countries, so 10 of those 19 countries are also ranked in the 40 least peaceful countries according to the Global Peace Index. Environmental disasters currently cause an average of 24 million displacements per year, compared to 7 million displacements per year due to armed conflict. So you can see that environmental disasters have cause a greater amount of displacement. And by 2050, we project there could be 1.2 billion people living in countries where the socio-economic resilience is unlikely to be sufficient to withstand the impact of recurrent ecological threats. This could lead to mass internal displacement, civil unrest, potentially economic collapse, as well as international implications with refugee migrations to neighbouring countries and beyond. So staying with those highlights and just demonstrating that another way is, when you look at resource-related threats, we see there's a potential for 740 million people to be displaced. Similarly, if you look at natural disasters, there's a potential for 1 billion people to be displaced. So the aggregate of resource-related risk and natural disasters, the aggregated number of countries in that high risk is 43 countries. When you take out the duplicates of countries, countries that are exposed to resource risks as well as natural disasters, it brings that total number of countries down to 32 countries, and at risk, 1.2 billion people at risk of being displaced by 2050. So this is what the globe looks like when it's coloured based on that ecological threat count. Remember, the ecological threat score is a physical count of threats faced by a particular country, with 8 threats being counted. You can see that the light green countries are the low threat countries, and the deeper the colours get, with the red and the purplish coloured countries being the countries most at threat. So this coloured map gives you a sense of that global distribution of ecological threats. Now, what is really stark is there are 3 bands, if you like. You can see this band through the Sahel Horn of the Belt of Africa, my apologies. Also this band down in Southern Africa from Angola through to Madagascar. Then this central, Middle East and Central Asia belt from Syria through to Pakistan. Certainly sub-Saharan African countries, or sub-Saharan Africa is a region that is most at risk for ecological threats, with the majority of countries, 33 out of 43, facing medium to high exposure. Similar in the MENA region, 15 of the 20 countries in the MENA region are exposed to medium or high ecological threats, including food insecurity, water stress, and exposure to natural disasters. Iran, Iraq, and Syria are some of the most vulnerable countries in that region, with a score of 4 or above. And what is stark is the contrast when you look at Europe and South America, which face lower levels of ecological threat. And one of the contributors here is certainly lower population growth. So that last chart was looking at the aggregated ecological threats. This map is pulling out the resource-related threats, and so it's just looking at water stress and food security. It displays a similar trend to what we see for the aggregated threats, with those 3 bands, with Southern Africa, that band across the Sahel region of Africa, and that Middle East Central Asia band as well. You'll see that there are some countries that aren't coloured in this particular graph, and that's due to data gaps. Okay, demonstrating that same information differently. This is the most affected countries by ecological threat. You see that Afghanistan is the most exposed country with sex threats, and people who follow the Global Peace Index will also know that Afghanistan is also the least peaceful country on the globe. Many of the countries here in this top list are African countries. and 10 of the 19 most exposed countries are also amongst the world's least peaceful countries. I pulled out this graph, and this is looking at just one of the threats being the countries with the least access to basic drinking water services. So this chart displays the percentage of population with access to basic drinking water services. You can see that the global average is 89%. You can see that Chad is the most worst off, and I should say that the indicator for encompasses both people using basic water services as well as people who have safely managed water services. So basic drinking water services defined as drinking water from an improved source, providing that the collection time is not more than 30 minutes for a round trip. So improved water services could include pipe water, could include boreholes, tube wells, protected dug wells, protected springs, even packaged or delivered water. So going back to the data, you can see Chad is the most exposed country here, with only 30% of the population having access to basic drinking water services. What is stark in this data is that 19 of the 20 countries that have least access are situated in sub-Saharan Africa. Another data set that I've pulled out is the countries with the most displacement from disasters from 2019. So this is a snapshot in time looking at displacement resulting from disasters. India is the top of the chart there. There's probably no surprises given that it's certainly one of the most populous country with 5 million displacements in 2019. Looking up and down that chart, there's points of interest. US, for example, with just under a million people, 916,000 people displaced due to disasters in 2019. Okay, I'm realising that I've thrown a lot of data at you there, and I might just hold up there and throw it open for questions until and then after some questions we can drive a bit deeper into some of the data sets. So if I can hand back to Francesca for some questions, that would be great.
Great. So we have one question here regarding the Green New Deal, which is, do you see potentials for Green New Deal principles such as holistic jobs, climate change focused policies and investments being embraced in peace negotiations and conflict resolution efforts?
I think the answer there is absolutely, and I'll drive a little bit deeper into some of these data sets, and that's really stark when you look at water scarcity and water-related conflict, which I'm going to touch on a little bit deeper. It's sometimes said that the next world war will be fought over water. Can I say that's not a prediction by IEP? It's just a commonly held statement. But when you start to look at the data on water scarcity and the impact on conflict as a result of water scarcity, is very stark. So I think the answer to that is absolutely. Thank you for the question.
We then had another speaking a little bit about the results. So what was surprising about the results of the index, and what was uncovered that was initially expected, that was not initially expected, apologies.
Yeah. For me, the most striking aspect when I first read the report is the predictions around the potential displacement. That figure of 1.2 billion people who are likely to be displaced by 2050. Can I just point out that 2050 is not really all that far off. We're talking under 3 decades now. And I think when you compare that to recent displacements, you think of recent migration waves, and that sort of 5 to 7 million that sort of headed towards Europe, so the sort of 2014 onwards period, and the impact that had globally, the impact that it had particularly on attitudes globally, the impact that had on political movements globally, certainly had an impact on shift in attitudes. So relatively very small figure of migrations had a significant impact on conflict and attitudes globally. What is a potential impact of that far greater amount of potential migration globally? That was probably for me the most stark outcome from the Ecological Threat Register. Certainly, I mentioned that this is the first edition of the Ecological Threat Register. The second edition is being considered now. Like the Global Peace Index and the Positive Peace Report, the Institute for Economics and Peace will look for ways to refine, look to ways, what are other data sets that are available to continue to improve this resource. But really the outcome, the intent of this project was to aggregate the data sets that are reliable data sets that are available, which is IEP strength, and to try to unpick the story that sits behind those data sets. And I think there is some very stark and alarming stories that sit behind these data sets. Thank you for the question.
Great. Next, we have a question. Do the scores calculated take into account engineering projects such as the Renaissance dams in Ethiopia, given the risks they pose to Egypt and Sudan used the Blue Nile as a lifeline balanced against a fragile state such as Ethiopia in control of the water?
Yeah, for sure. Good question, thank you. So no, it certainly doesn't take into account current or future projects. I think the GERD is a really good example of water-related conflict, and I won't delve too deeply into that conflict. We are currently doing a fairly large-scale project with Ethiopia. In fact, some of our Ethiopian participants may be present on this event today, but certainly current and future projects have a potential to impact both positively and negatively across these data sets, particularly that data set around conflict-related water issues. Thank you for the question.
We have 3 more, if that's okay. The first one is, what makes Japan and most of South America low in ecological threats?
Yeah. Great question, thank you. And it's fairly simple. The one is projected population growth, which is the next aspect I'm going to climb into. And you'll see that where population growth is soaring, it brings additional stress onto resources such as food and water. So that's one aspect, and another aspect is the resilience of countries, remembering that the Ecological Threat Register also takes into account a country's ability to be prepared, respond and recover from an ecological threat. And my country, Australia, is a really good example. We have 3 identified threats, and this is really stark for us at the moment. It's probably stark for us all at the moment, given the global shock. But Australia has recently experienced the impact of rising temperature, resulting in wildfire or forest fire. Had significant impact across the country. A large portion of the eastern seaboard of this country burned just over 12-18 months ago. So it's really stark for us. But having said that, Australia is a high positive peace country. We do have the ability to respond and recover from shocks. And certainly when you look at Japan and countries within South America with that aggregation of higher positive peace, and also, and I say that being very conscious that there are some low positive peace countries in South America, but population growth with positive peace reduces the impact of the ecological threats. Thank you.
Great. Well, it turns out that one of the questions was just answered. So I think we'll save the rest for the end of the conversation, and we'll let you go on with the rest of your presentation, Charlie.
Thank you, Francesca, and thanks for the questions. So, as promised, I'd like to talk a little bit about population first of all, and certainly rapid population growth can threaten the stability and drive water and food stress, and population growth is picked up in the Ecological Threat Register. So looking at some of the key findings around population, global population is projected to reach 20 billion by 2050. As I mentioned, that's not that far away, it's only 30 years away, and that's up from the current global population of 7.5 billion today. By 2050, the 40 least peaceful countries will have an additional 1.3 billion people and will be home for more than half of the world's population. 14 of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've already mentioned that sub-Saharan Africa tends to feature very highly in the Ecological Threat Register, but 14 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are projected to double their population by 2050, making it the fastest growing region globally. One such country, as I mentioned before, that we're currently doing a project in Ethiopia. It has a large population, the second most populous country in Africa, and an expectation to double that population in the coming 3 decades. So here's a graphical representation of that population growth, and once again it's broken out into very high peace, low peace, and very low peace countries, and you can see the projected population growth across those peace levels. So clearly low and very low peace countries have the fastest growth and also will have the largest populations. As I mentioned before, by 2050, the 40 least peaceful countries will have an additional 1.3 billion people and will be home to more than half of the world's population. You can see that very high peace countries from that 1960 projected out to 2050, the population growth is reasonably level, and then it shifts up there, looking at the different groupings based on peacefulness. Okay, water stress. Touching on water stress. So these categories are lifts out of the Ecological Threat Register, and I'm just touching on each of the categories. Once again, I encourage you to if you want to delve deeper into a particular area, encourage you to go to our website, Vision of Humanity, to the Ecological Threat Register is there and available freely. It's downloadable, and encourage you to delve deeper on particular areas of interest for you. So water stress it's defined as the imbalance between renewable water source, renewable water supply, and includes industrial, agricultural, and domestic sector water demand. Today, 2.6 billion people live in 46 countries experiencing high or extreme water stress. And I stress this doesn't mean that every single person in those countries has experienced water stress. Rather, they are living in a country that experiences water stress. There is now 60% less fresh water available per person than there was in the early 1960s. High levels of water stress indicate that there's not enough water available to meet the levels of withdrawal, and the countries may be forced to redirect water allocation to only the most critical uses. When water stress is at its most severe, such redirections may no longer be sufficient. In these cases, household water supplies could be shut off intermittently, irrigation curbed, and industrial use limited or barred. Globally, 1.8 million people are exposed to extreme levels. By 2040, some 3.4 billion people living in, by 2040, 5.4 billion people will live in 59 countries experiencing high or extreme water stress, and these will include India and China. The combined effects of rising temperature, population growth, increasing rainfall variability will reduce future water availability. So here's a graph of the trend in fresh water use globally projected out to 2050. So the figure displays global water withdrawals. There is now, as I mentioned before, now 60% less fresh water available per person than there was in the early 1960s. The rising global population, greater agricultural, irrigation, increased industrialisation has placed substantial stresses on these limited water resources. And as a result, water withdrawal has risen sharply and is expected to further rise. On the current freshwater use trajectory, by 2050, the water demand will be 50% higher than it is today. The world's demand for water is likely to surge, driven by population growth, economic transitions towards more intensive water consumption. Now, I mentioned this before, and as a result of one of the questions, and use that adage about the next world war being fought over by water. But this is a graph looking at the amount or the trend in water-related violent incidents from the year 20,000 to 2018. Now, it should note that what it displays that from 2010 to 2018, there's been an increase of 270% in water-related violent incidents. And water incidents range in their levels of severity. Some incidents have been shows of force that did not end in violence, such as protests over water shortages or water prices. Some incidents, however, did result in extreme levels of violence, and certainly this has been evident in both Yemen and Iraq that have experienced the most water-related incidents. Food security. So food security is achieved when at all times people have the physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their basic food preferences, dietary needs for an active and healthy life. Severe food insecurity is where an individual may have exhausted their food or have gone at least a day without eating. Their health, nutrition, and well-being are severely at risk. Global food demand will increase by 50% in the next 30 years. The number of people facing moderate or severe food insecurity will increase to 3.5 billion by 2050. So this table displays a percentage of number of people from suffering from food insecurity. And you can see that that growth from 2019 to 2018 with an additional 300 million people falling into food security. So as of 2018, 2 billion people are currently food insecure. By 2050, this figure is expected to increase from 2 billion to 3.5 billion. I should add, you'll notice this data set is ruled off at 2018, so it doesn't factor in the impact of COVID-19. There's certainly some early indications that COVID has had an impact on food insecurity globally. So this graph is demonstrating regional food insecurity as a percentage of population. So it's a breakdown of percentage of each region's population that is food insecure. As mentioned, Sub-Saharan Africa is the most food insecure region globally. More than 600 million people in that region are facing food insecurity, which is equivalent to 38% of the region's population. And then if you're looking at a regional count, then it scales down from there. And I think it's interesting and worth pointing out that 8% of people in North America and Europe are also food insecure. I some ways think that's a little bit obscene when you think that obesity is one of the major causes for death in those regions. How are we going for time? Okay, I'm just going to touch on natural disasters, and we'll open up for questions once again. So looking at the trend in natural disasters, this figure displays that natural disasters trend from 1960 onwards, and you can see that rapid annual increase in natural disasters. Globally, the frequency of natural disasters has increased tenfold since 1960. And floods and storms account for 71% of the natural disasters between 1990 and 2019. The largest number of natural disasters occurred in 2005 with 442 incidents, which caused some 900,000 deaths and left 160 people affected and in need of immediate assistance. We should add that although natural disasters have increased significantly, disasters are much less fatal, meaning there are less deaths per natural disaster. In some ways, that relates back to the earlier conversation I had about the increased resilience, increase in positive peace globally. Now, I want to touch on displacements, which I already have touched on, and what this graph is doing is comparing natural disaster displacements compared to conflict-related displacements. And you can see the number of placements annually for both conflict and natural disasters from 2008 through to 2019. Environmental disasters displace an average of 24 million people per annum, compared with 7 million per annum for being displaced for armed conflict. Natural disasters led to 25 million displacements in 2019, which is 3 times higher than 8.6 million displacements for armed conflict. Since 2008, when you aggregate this data, there has been an estimated 380 million displacements from natural disasters and armed conflict, with 290 million of those displacements relating to natural disasters and 90 million displacements as a result of conflict. Okay, I've gone back to that aggregated heat map, looking at the regions that are most at threat through their aggregated ecological threats and their low resilience as measured by the positive peace report. And when you start thinking about the potential migration, and I mentioned before, we're very conscious of the recent impact of some 5.7 million global migration as a result of displacement. And you can see that the potential migration routes are being out of South America to North America, being from Africa into Europe, and also from that Central Asia or the MENA region into Europe as well. So when you think about the potential of 1.2 billion displacements globally by 2050, I don't suggest that those displacements will result in migration, but certainly it is very predictable that a percentage of that displacement will result in migration having a global impact as a result of ecological threats. Okay, so that really is a conclusion of the presentation, and I'll open up to questions very shortly. As I've mentioned a couple of times, please go to our website, Vision of Humanity. The Ecological Threat Register and all of our reports are available and downloadable. A shout out for Steve Killaley's book. If you're interested in the work of the Institute for Economics and Peace, this is brought together very nicely by a book that was recently authored and released by our founder and chairman, Mr. Steve Killaley, Peace in the Age of Chaos, and he certainly looks at the essentiality of the flourishing of positive peace to deal with some of these intractable or what are seen as intractable global issues. And finally, just a shout out for some of our programs. The Institute for Economics and Peace has a large number of offerings if you want to dive deeper into our research or have a better sense of how to activate our research. And some examples are the IEP Ambassador Program. Francesca mentioned that at the start as one of our IEP ambassadors. We're calling for expressions of interest for people who would like to join our Ambassador Program. Once again, it's a free offering, and we currently have some 1,600 IEP ambassadors globally in 106 countries. We're currently doing a bespoke ambassador program for Ethiopia, have some 800 people registered in Ethiopia for our current ambassador program, which is fantastic, given that Ethiopia is clearly a country under stress at this point in time. Our Positive Peace Academy is an online offering, Online Positive Peace Academy. It has recently been revamped and is engaging peace that you can engage in and share it broadly. It takes a couple of hours to work through the 4 modules. And if you're interested in diving in deeper, certainly there's lots of higher education options available through the Rotary Peace Centres, through Blood Queen University, through a range of academic organisations that adopt our research into their programs. thank you very much for joining in today. I will stop sharing screen and I'll hand back to Francesca to moderate some Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Charlie. So we have some questions from the first part of the presentation, and that is, what are the economic responsibilities and obligations of Western countries that contributed to conflicts, so through colonialism or military action, in countries that are also high at risk from ecological threats?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, we're very careful at the Institute for Economics and Peace to stay very neutral. We're hanging on to our neutrality, and really our work is about aggregating the data and bringing together the data. You know, I think there is a global responsibility, regardless, for countries to come together. It's not this ecological threat, or the aggregated impact of ecological threat is not going to be resolved by a sector, a country, a group of countries. It needs global collaboration. It needs countries to really focus on, you know, how do we shift positive peace, putting a plug for positive peace once again, but how do we shift you know, the global resilience, and certainly that multilateral collaboration is critical to being able to work through this. And certainly, and I shouldn't overplug my boss's book, but Steve Killidy's book, it really goes to the very heart of this, you know, unpicking that understanding about where we are at and creating a pathway out of not only the impact of ecological threats, but also the rising concern, as demonstrated from the Global Peace Index, of decreasing peacefulness globally. Thank you for the question.
Great. Linked to this, we have a question on, in your opinion, how do we effectively present the data and research to our world leaders in order to convince them to enact change collaboratively, and more specifically, for them to create a comprehensive plan, since so many of these ecological issues are interconnected with peace and governance?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great question. And you know, the Institute for Economics and Peace, we once again, you know, we produce the data, and we hope that it is adopted as widely and broadly as it possibly can. We don't position ourselves as, when I say the Institute doesn't position itself as activists. Well, we see what our role is to provide the data for activists to be able to create the influence. And we see this play out in a whole range of ways. What was really interesting after the Ecological Threat Register, some multilateral policy level folk came together to discuss the observations of the Ecological Threat Register, and came out with a number of recommendations. In fact, it's not quite public document as yet, but will be fairly shortly. When I say fairly shortly, in the coming days, I know it's going through final edits, and I'd be very happy to share that. The point of that observation is looking for opportunities to use this powerful data to lobby or to inform policy directions. We're always looking for those opportunities. We enjoy take-up. When I say we, Institute for Economics and Peace enjoys take-up by some nation states, and similarly, some nation states that don't like the stories that our data is telling choose not to engage with our data. But it certainly comes down to individuals and organisations who can use this data for activism or lobbying to increase the reach of this data. Thank you for the question.
Great. We have three more. This is all related to the Ecological Threat Register. So the first is, the ETR points to population growth as a factor that exacerbates threats such as water scarcity and food insecurity. But to what degree is overpopulation a product of the economic and social environment we are currently in? which might drive families in the global south to have large families out of perceived necessity? Does the focus need to be on curtailing population growth or on restructuring our system to better accommodate a large population?
Yeah, I think the answer is in the question is understanding the whole social system at play, and certainly our work around the positive peace and the positive peace framework is systems thinking, understanding that social constructs, whether that's at country level or down to community level. And it's not looking at a particular, the positive peace approach is not about looking at a single aspect and looking for interventions and a cause and effect approach to problem solving, but the approach is certainly around looking at the complete social system, understanding that social system, and understanding how to nudge a social system by incremental shifts to those encoded norms and also the intent of the system, so it's shifting into a virtuous cycle as opposed to a negative cycle. That felt a cumbersome way to answer that question, but I think that, I could spend a whole another 60 minutes talking about that very question, and I encourage you to look at the Positive Peace report and the Positive Peace approach to systems change in answer to that question. But thank you.
Great. And then the next question is, in determining the ecological threats to peace, does the report account for the impact of an ecological disaster in a neighboring state, such as inducing large flow of asylum seekers or climate refugees? Or does it only factor the number of refugees and IDPs as a percentage of the population based on ongoing conflicts and past disasters?
Yep, and the latter is correct. It's looking at displacement within a country. So I mentioned that this is the first Ecological Threat Register. We're certainly very open and looking to how we can improve the Ecological Threat Register and sort of deepening the data on migration, impacts of migration across borders is certainly one of those aspects where we see opportunity. So yeah, in answer to the question, certainly the latter is the case. It looks at IDPs, conscious that many of those IDPs are going to result in cross-border migration. Thank you for the question.
And then the last one is, was there an identified catalyst for the jump in water stress-related incidents from 2011 to 2012? If you know off the top of it.
Yeah, damn fancy getting the last question, not being able to answer it. I think the answer is yes. Can I ask you to go to the report and go to the chapter on water stress? I know it delves deeper, and I answered this question by saying my role at IEP is as a practitioner and taking this research and activating it, not as one of the researchers. I know certainly the researchers looked at the increase in water-related violence, and from recollection, that is fleshed out in the chapter. So I'll take the phone a friend option there and refer you back to the report. But thank you for the question.
No. And then this just came in, but what makes you hopeful for the, what, if anything, makes you hopeful for the future? This comes from Professor Garcia, who would like you to answer that.
And thank you, Professor Garcia. Shout out to you, Denise. I saw you on the webinar there. It's been a great supporter of the Institute for Economics and Peace, and thank you for that final question. I answered the answer to that question comes in my earlier comment around when you look at positive peace. And another way to think about positive peace, it is a country's capacity or the globe's capacity to be more peaceful. And what we have seen over the last decade is a 2.5% increase in positive peace. That may not sound very large, and to some that may not sound statistically relevant, but I encourage you to look at the methodology, and you'll understand that, build a deeper understanding that peace is hard fought. So those incremental increases, global increases in positive peace is a very encouraging trend. You may also remember I mentioned that 135 of countries globally have increased. 135 out of 163 countries have increased in positive peacefulness. So that's 3 out of 4 countries have increased their ability, their capacity to become more peaceful, to become more resilient, and be able to better deal with ecological threats. So there's certainly this is it is somewhat a doom and gloom report, the Ecological Threat Register, but that overlay of positive peace, which is why I front-ended it, I think certainly provides hope. And thank you, Denise, for your question.
All right, that brings us to the end. So thanks to everyone, our featured speakers, and all of you for joining us for tonight's webinar. We're so glad that you were able to be a part of this and hope you learned from this engaging discussion. Please be sure to keep in touch with us, the Office of Alumni Relations, via social and our website to see what we have coming up next.